I grew up in a house where shadows stretched longer than they should, where mirrors sometimes reflected more than just our faces. From the outside, it looked perfect. Large windows, soft carpets, and a backyard so wide it seemed endless. But inside, beyond the glow of lamps and the comfort of prayers whispered at night, something else lived with us. I was told he was my uncle. That's what my father said when I finally asked, my small voice breaking the silence of the garage one afternoon. He smiled, calm but tight, and told me not to worry. Yet I knew my father had no brother. This uncle wasn't flesh and blood in the way we were. He lingered where the light ended, sometimes a flicker in the mirror, sometimes a shadow that didn't move with the sun, sometimes the smell of smoke in a room untouched by fire. And whenever he appeared, my father's face stiffened, his voice lowered, and the whole house seemed to hold its breath. One night, I saw him clearly for the first time. He stood on the porch, long coat hanging still, his skin the color of ash under the porch light. Blank face, empty eyes. And though he never spoke, he always came with something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. My father always took it, always hid it away, as if our lives depended on what was written inside. And maybe they did. My childhood would have seemed idyllic to anyone looking in from the outside. We had money, more than enough to live comfortably. My father, Jonathan, carried himself with quiet conviction. Every morning before school and every night before bed, he led us in prayer, his voice steady and unwavering. My mother was grace itself, always reading, always moving like she carried music in her bones. She could sense what I felt before I could put words to it. Together, they were the kind of parents people envied. But beneath the rhythm of our home, prayers, meals, the routine of childhood, there were fractures I wasn't meant to see. My father grew tense after sundown. He would drift to the basement, sitting in the dark as though he were hiding from something. He told me once in a hushed tone that if I ever saw shadows moving on their own or reflections that didn't match reality, I was to ignore them. "Keep walking," he said firmly, as if it was one of the house rules, as essential as brushing my teeth or saying grace. I learned to obey, but children notice more than parents realize. I noticed the way my father always reached the door before anyone else when there was a knock. I noticed the whispers outside on the porch, and the folded papers passed from the pale man's hand to my father's trembling fingers. The notes were hidden away quickly, as though they were poisonous. The house itself seemed to change around these visits. The halls felt colder, longer, as though the walls had shifted in the night. Mirrors caught glimpses of him, his silhouette a half step behind me. Sometimes I smelled smoke, sharp and acrid, though no fire had burned. When I asked questions, they were met with silence. My father's gaze hardened, and my mother's smile faltered, as though words themselves could summon disaster. "Don't," my father would say. Just that one word, clipped and final, enough to make my throat close around the rest of my questions. And so I learned not to speak of him. Instead, I carried the unease alone, a growing suspicion that our family's perfection was only a mask. It was after my 8th birthday that mask finally cracked. The man came to the back porch again. I watched from the staircase as he handed my father another folded note. But this time, my father did not move with urgency. He froze. His face drained of color, his hand trembling as he passed the paper to my mother. She unfolded it, read, and collapsed to the floor with a scream that didn't sound like grief or fear. It sounded like something inside her had been torn apart. That was the first time I understood. Whatever he was, whatever bargain my family had struck. It held power over all of us. The night after my mother collapsed with that note in her hands, the air in the house shifted. It wasn't just grief or fear, it was as if the walls themselves absorbed her scream and held onto it, echoing it back in every creak of the floorboards.
I tried to pretend things were normal. I told myself maybe the note was about a death in the family, someone I had never met. But when I pressed my ear to the floor that night, I didn't hear morning prayers or soft comfort. I heard my parents arguing, their voices raw with fear. "How are we going to do this in 6 months?" my father demanded. Dishes rattled, a chair scraped against the floor. "We can't just give him up," my mother hissed back, her voice breaking. "He's never asked for something like this before. We can't. Curse your grandfather, Jonathan." I lay frozen on the stairs, every word carving into me. 6 months. Give him up. Who were they talking about? I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. The man on the porch wasn't a shadow, wasn't just some hallucination. He was real, and his power over us was not imagined, it was absolute. From that night forward, his presence became impossible to ignore. I saw him in dreams, standing at the edge of my bed, silent, watching. I saw him in mirrors, his face pale and unreadable behind my own reflection. Even in daylight, I felt him nearby, waiting, patient. And my parents changed. My father grew frantic, spending hours locked in his study, whispering prayers too quietly for me to hear. My mother stood at the kitchen window for long stretches, one hand pressed to her stomach, eyes vacant. She moved as though already carrying a weight too heavy to bear. That was when the dread rooted itself inside me, deep and cold. I realized that whatever was written on that paper was not about someone else. It was about me. And for the first time in my life, I knew the thing that lived with us was not just haunting our family. It was claiming us. The days after that night blurred into a strange rhythm of dread. Our family routines, prayers before meals, gentle laughter in the kitchen, my mother humming as she cooked, fell silent. In their place came whispers, closed doors, and a heaviness that pressed down on every room. Even sunlight seemed weaker in our house, as if the man's shadow had stretched to cover it. I watched my parents unravel in different ways. My father became obsessed with scripture. He spent long hours locked in his study. The door cracked just enough for me to hear the low murmur of his voice. Sometimes it rose in desperate pleading. Other times it dropped into angry mutters, his fists striking the desk hard enough to rattle the bookshelves. Once I peeked through the opening and saw him kneeling on the floor, rocking back and forth with his Bible open, whispering words so fast they ran together. He wasn't praying anymore, he was bargaining. My mother changed too, but in quieter ways. She grew heavier, her steps slower. Her hands lingered on her belly as if she carried a child, though I never saw her eat enough to explain her swelling body. I caught her once in the bathroom mirror, her shirt lifted, her eyes fixed on her stomach, and there beside her in the reflection stood the man, tall, pale, coat draped over his shoulders like a shroud. She didn't scream, she didn't move. She simply pressed her hand tighter against herself, as though she understood and accepted his presence. I started seeing him everywhere. At first it was subtle, a shape behind the glass door, the outline of a figure by the tree line in the backyard, the shift of shadows in the hallway. But soon he no longer cared to hide. I woke one night to find him at the foot of my bed, standing so still I thought he might be a dream. His face was blank, unreadable, his hands resting at his sides. When I blinked, he was gone, but the smell of smoke clung to the room long after. I wanted to scream, to tell my parents that he was no longer lurking in the corners, but walking openly through our lives. Yet each time I tried, I saw the terror in their eyes, the way their bodies tensed, and the words died in my throat. They knew, and they were too afraid to speak. Then came the storm. The wind clawed at the windows, trees scraped against the siding, thunder rolled endlessly overhead. I woke to the sound of my mother's voice, shrill and broken. "We have to give him a child tomorrow, Jonathan," she screamed. My father's reply was muffled, desperate. "We'll find another way. Just wait, please."
"I'm done waiting," she shrieked. "You know what will happen if we don't." Then came the crash. A sharp, terrible sound like metal tearing through fabric. My body moved before my mind caught up. I stumbled down the stairs, my heart hammering, my stomach twisting. The bathroom door glowed faintly, a sickly light spilling across the hallway floor. I pushed it open and froze. My mother lay on the tile, her body twisted unnaturally, crimson spreading across her dress. A knife rested in her hand. My father was on his knees beside her, his shirt stained, his face streaked with tears. In his trembling arms he held something small and pink, something not ready to live that he rocked gently, whispering words I couldn't understand. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I stumbled backward, colliding with the wall, and then I ran. I locked myself in my closet, curled into a ball, and prayed for morning. The funeral was a blur. A closed casket, neighbors whispering, a church filled with flowers and silence. The official cause, suicide. The coroner's report, neat and final, but I knew better. My father knew better. We never spoke of it. In the years that followed, he withered. He stopped leading prayers, stopped attending church. Bottles replaced his Bible. I would hear him muttering at night, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing, sometimes listening, as if someone unseen sat across from him. The man no longer lingered in corners. He stood openly in our home, and my father spoke to him as one speaks to a god or a master. I carried my questions like stones in my chest until the weight nearly broke me. On a night heavy with silence, when my father sat slumped on the porch with a bottle dangling from his hand, I finally let them out. "You killed her," I whispered. My voice shook, but the words tasted like fire. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes hollow. Tears welled as he stared at me. "He wanted you," he said, voice breaking. "A child of ours. That's what the note said. They gave us 6 months. The truth spilled like poison. They had tried to create another child, thinking it might be enough, but time ran out. The baby wasn't ready, and my mother, unable to give me up, had chosen another way." I stood in the doorway numb, watching the man who had once been unshakable crumble into a shell of himself. His confession was a wound that would never heal. But I needed to know more. "Where did he come from?" I asked. My father's gaze drifted past me, unfocused, as if watching something move across the ceiling. Then he spoke, his voice a whisper pulled from somewhere deep and broken. "My father made a deal. My grandfather. I was born wrong, crippled, unable to breathe on my own. Doctors gave up. But then one morning I stood, I spoke, I lived. That's when he came. The man. The thing. He never told us what it was. Maybe he didn't know. But he let him in. And after that, notes began to arrive." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "I curse him. I curse my father for saving me. If he had let me die as a child, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe you wouldn't have to carry this." I sat in silence. his words burning into me, the weight of generations pressing down like chains. And in that silence, I felt it, the touch on my shoulder, light but cold. I turned. The man stood behind me, fully visible, his coat detailed in every fold, his face pale and unreadable. In his hand, as always, was a note. My hand moved on its own, taking it from him. The second it left his fingers, he was gone. I unfolded it slowly, dread crawling through me. 3 words were written in neat, slanted handwriting. Your father. The note trembled in my hands, the words burning themselves into my mind. Your father. I looked up, but he was gone. Only silence remained, a silence so deep I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My father sat across from me, eyes hollow, body sagging as though he already knew what the note would say. When I showed it to him, his face collapsed. He didn't flinch, he didn't question, he only wept.
"He won't stop," my father whispered. "He never stops. The deal never ends." Something inside me snapped. For years I had lived in fear of a man who was not a man, who spoke only in commands delivered on paper. For years I had watched him strip away my family piece by piece. But now it was my father he wanted, and my father was already too broken to fight. The house groaned as the wind rose outside. Shadows thickened in the corners. I felt him before I saw him, cooled air brushing against my neck, the smell of smoke filling the room. My father dropped to his knees, his voice breaking into sobs. "Please," he begged the darkness, "take me, leave him." And then the man was there, not half-formed in a mirror, not a fleeting shadow, but towering over us, fully revealed. His coat dragged against the floor, his skin pale as ash. His face was long, expressionless, his eyes a void I couldn't hold. He reached out one hand, palm open, waiting. My father crawled forward, clutching at his coat as though begging for mercy. The man did not bend, did not speak. He simply waited, patient, inevitable. Something surged through me, a mix of terror and rage. I lunged between them, shoving my father back. "No!" My voice cracked but held. "You want him, you'll have to go through me." For the first time, the man moved. His head tilted slowly, unnaturally, as though curious. The lights flickered. The walls seemed to ripple. I felt the house itself strain under his presence, every nail and beam creaking as if about to splinter. He stepped closer, and the air grew heavy, crushing the breath from my lungs. My legs trembled, but I stood firm. My father clutched at my arm, whispering for me to stop, but I shook him off. The man extended his hand again, not to me, but past me, toward my father. The command was clear. I screamed, grabbing the Bible from the table, hurling it at him with all the strength I had. It struck his chest and fell to the floor with a hollow thud. He didn't flinch, not even a breath of reaction. The room darkened further. Shadows stretched like fingers across the walls, swallowing the light. And then he leaned down, so close I could feel the cold radiating from his skin. His lips never moved, but in my head a voice whispered, a sound that wasn't words, but meaning, a command etched into bone. "It is already decided." The walls shook. My father screamed, and I knew the choice was no longer ours to make. When the shaking stopped, silence returned. But it was the kind of silence that carried weight, pressing against my chest until every breath hurt. The man was gone. No shadow lingered, no trace of smoke, Only the note remained, lying on the floor where I had dropped it. My father knelt beside me, shoulders shaking, his hands covering his face. He wasn't praying, he wasn't begging, he was simply breaking. I had never seen him look so small, so utterly emptied of hope. I wanted to comfort him, to say we could find a way out, but the words felt hollow. We both knew better. The deal wasn't finished. It had never been finished. It had only passed from one generation to the next, binding us tighter with every demand. I picked up the note again. Your father. Just 2 words, yet they carried a sentence heavier than death. I could already feel its weight pressing down on me, as if the ink itself had sunk into my skin. For days after, my father wandered the house like a ghost. He didn't eat, he didn't drink. Sometimes I caught him staring at the door, waiting for the inevitable knock. Other times he sat in the basement, his lips moving soundlessly. I stopped asking questions. The answers didn't matter anymore. All I could do was wait. Wait for the night when the man in the coat would return, hand outstretched, ready to collect what had been promised. And when that night comes, I wonder if I will have the strength to stop him, or if I will simply watch, the way my father once watched, as the deal claims what little remains of us. That is where my story ends, though the fear never did. Years have passed, but I still wake in the middle of the night, certain I'll find him standing at the foot of my bed. Sometimes I hear the faint creak of the porch steps or smell smoke where nothing has burned. Maybe my father will be taken soon. Maybe I will. Or maybe the deal will stretch on forever, demanding more until nothing remains of our bloodline but silence and shadows. So if you ever hear a knock at your door after midnight, and when you open it, you find nothing but a folded note lying on the porch, do not touch it. Do not read it. Because once you take his paper, the deal has already begun.